The grand ballroom of the Westbridge Hotel in San Diego shimmered with golden light. Crystal chandeliers hung above rows of linen-draped tables, their surfaces crowded with wine glasses, polished silverware, and elaborate centerpieces of red roses and winter greenery. A live jazz quartet played near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the smooth notes wrapping around the chatter of the company's most successful year yet. Evelyn Walsh stood just inside the entrance. Taking in the spectacle, she clutched her sequined clutch against her rib cage as if it might steady her breathing. From across the room, she could see her husband, Daniel, deep in conversation with the CEO and a few younger associates. His hands moved animatedly as he spoke, a glass of champagne balanced between his fingers. In the warm glow of the lights, he looked every bit the accomplished senior partner, his graying temples lending an air of distinguished confidence. But Evelyn felt no pride tonight, only a dull, relentless ache in her chest. They had been married 33 years, long enough for her to recognize that he hadn't looked at her the way he looked at his colleagues in a very long time. Long enough to know when he was hiding something behind the easy charm and the pat on her shoulder. When she finally forced herself to cross the threshold, a few employees offered polite greetings, calling her Mrs. Walsh and thanking her for coming. She smiled mechanically, glancing over their shoulders, searching for a particular face she'd seen in more than a few company photos. And there she was, Cara Morales. Cara's dark hair fell over the shoulders of a backless emerald dress, her laughter floating above the music. She was perched on the edge of Daniel's conversation circle, her hand brushing lightly against his elbow as she leaned in to say something. It was a small touch, one most people would miss. Evelyn did not. She felt it like a brand searing through the fragile layer of denial she'd been clinging to. Daniel glanced around, and for a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Evelyn expected warmth, some acknowledgement of her presence. Instead, Daniel looked almost startled to see her there. He lifted his glass in a vague greeting and returned his attention to Cara. She felt her stomach turn. A young woman in a red satin dress approached with a clipboard, her smile professional. "Mrs. Walsh, if you'd like to check your coat, I can take it for you." Evelyn hesitated, then shrugged out of her wrap and handed it over. She felt exposed without it, as if everyone could see straight through the beading on her gown and into the hollow place inside her. "I'll show you to your table," the woman continued. But Evelyn didn't want to sit. Not yet. She needed to see to be sure she wasn't imagining this. "Thank you," she murmured. "I'll join my husband shortly." She walked slowly along the perimeter of the ballroom, letting the music and laughter pass over her. She stopped at a high table and picked up a glass of water she had no intention of drinking. From here, she had a clear view of Daniel and Cara. She watched the way Cara's eyes lifted to his, how she angled her body toward him, how he bent his head to hear her over the music, his face softening in a way she hadn't seen in years. There was no mistaking it now. A group of Daniel's colleagues approached, and for a moment, Cara stepped aside. Evelyn could have taken the opportunity to walk up, to slide her arm into Daniel's and assert her place. But she stayed frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was easier to pretend she was invisible. She turned her gaze toward the windows, where the city glittered under a cold December sky, the perfect backdrop for a celebration she no longer felt part of all around her. People laughed and toasted to success, to loyalty, to teamwork. Evelyn swallowed, feeling the irony settle like a stone in her throat. She knew this was the moment her life began to split in two. The years she spent believing she was enough and everything that would come after, she learned she wasn't. And in that instant, watching her husband's hand drift to Cara's lower back, Evelyn knew something with absolute cold certainty. She was done pretending. Evelyn forced herself to move away from the window. She couldn't just stand there and let the entire room see her unravel. She navigated through small clusters of people, nodding politely when someone greeted her, her mind a fog of suspicion and dread. At a long table near the dance floor, she paused, pretending to study the display of framed photographs commemorating the firm's milestones. Daniel was in many of them, accepting awards, standing beside blueprints, smiling alongside Cara. In one photo, they stood shoulder to shoulder, her hand on his arm, their faces turned toward each other in matching laughter. Evelyn studied it so long her eyes burned. She felt a tap on her shoulder. "Evelyn, isn't this something?" It was Marjorie Taylor, one of the senior partner's wives. She had always been kind to Evelyn, never one to gossip, at least not cruelly. Tonight, Marjorie's gaze flickered to Daniel and Kara. Before returning to Evelyn's face, cautious but warm. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said quietly. Marjorie shifted her clutch under her arm. "I suppose everyone expected you'd be sitting with Daniel," but she trailed off, her lips pressing together. "But what?" Marjorie sighed. "I've noticed." "Well, everyone has noticed, really. Daniel and Kara have been close, closer than colleagues usually are." Evelyn felt her stomach turn again. She'd been prepared for this, but hearing it aloud knocked the breath from her chest. Marjorie laid a hand gently on her forearm. "I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. It's not my place." "No," Evelyn interrupted, her voice low but steady. "Thank you for telling me." Marjorie gave her an apologetic look and drifted away, leaving Evelyn alone again with the roaring in her ears. She turned back to the table of photographs as if she could will the image of her husband and Kara into something harmless. But she couldn't. Her phone buzzed in her clutch with trembling fingers. She drew it out. A notification from their shared cloud storage glowed on the screen. New photos synced. Monterey trip. Her heart lurched. Daniel had told her he'd gone to a conference in Monterey 3 weeks ago. The memory of him kissing her cheek before leaving his suitcase in hand made her sick. Evelyn unlocked the phone and opened the folder. There they were. Dozens of photos. Daniel and Kara in a wine bar. Kara leaning across the table to touch his face. Daniel standing on a rocky cliff overlooking the ocean, smiling into her camera. One photo caught them side by side on a bench, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. Each picture felt like a nail driven into Evelyn's chest. She looked up, disoriented, and realized she was still standing in full view of the ballroom. She turned abruptly and walked toward the powder room, clutching her phone as though it might shatter. Inside the restroom, the music was muffled, replaced by the quiet hush of running water and the faintest echo of laughter from the hall. Evelyn locked herself in a stall, pressed her back against the cool tile, and let the sob break free. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to tear every sequin from her gown. But instead, she sat down, wiped her face, and opened the photos again. She zoomed in on Daniel's face, searching for remorse, some sign that he'd hesitated. But all she saw was ease and affection, the look he'd stopped giving her years ago. A wave of humiliation crashed over her. She was the last to know. She'd been the last for everything. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the texts they'd exchanged, the ones she'd discovered only weeks before. She hadn't dared open them all until now. Kara. I still feel like we'll get caught. Daniel. Let them talk. I don't care anymore. Another Kara. I wish you were spending Christmas with me instead. Daniel. Someday, beautiful. Someday. Evelyn swallowed the bile rising in her throat. She wiped her cheeks with a tissue. Studying her reflection in the mirror as she emerged from the stall, her mascara had left bruised shadows beneath her eyes, but she didn't care. She looked at herself as if seeing a stranger, a woman who had believed in a man who didn't deserve her faith, a woman who had spent more than half her life standing behind him while he stepped into the spotlight. No more. Evelyn squared her shoulders and tucked her phone back into her clutch. When she turned to leave the restroom, her steps were steadier than they'd been all evening. The party was still going strong, oblivious to the truth, threading itself through every glass of champagne. She walked slowly along the edge of the dance floor, each stride feeling more like a reclaiming. Tonight, she decided she would not shrink. She would not disappear into the corner while Daniel wrapped himself around another woman. Tonight, she would watch them with open eyes, and when the moment came, she would not hesitate. Evelyn returned to the ballroom. The weight of the phone in her clutch, somehow heavier now that it held the final confirmation. But as she walked past the elegantly dressed guests, none of them noticed the war raging behind her calm expression. She approached the table reserved for senior partners and their spouses. A gold card with her name on it rested beside Daniel's place setting. For a moment, she considered taking the seat. She imagined folding her napkin neatly in her lap, pretending to be the supportive wife everyone expected, but something in her refused. Instead, She set her clutch down and stood behind the chair, watching as Daniel and Kara spoke in low voices, their heads bent together over a small plate of hors d'oeuvres. She didn't know which was worse, how comfortable they looked, or how certain they were that she would never dare interrupt. When Kara finally noticed her standing there, she didn't flinch. She offered Evelyn a thin, practiced smile, as if they were nothing more than polite acquaintances. Mrs. Walsh, Kara said, her voice smooth. I didn't realize you'd arrived. Evelyn held her gaze. Apparently, Daniel shifted, his hand falling away from Kara's wrist as though it had never been there. He cleared his throat. Evelyn, I was about to come find you. Of course you were. He opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, the CEO's voice boomed from the podium near the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The band fell silent, and the room's conversations dwindled to murmurs. Evelyn stayed rooted to the spot behind her chair, every nerve alight. Tonight, we celebrate not only a remarkable year, but also the extraordinary people who made it possible, the CEO continued, beaming. Chief among them, our own Daniel Walsh, whose leadership and innovation brought our firm record-breaking success. A smattering of applause grew into a sustained ovation. Daniel tried to look humble, but his chest swelled with pride. Evelyn saw the way his eyes flicked to Kara, how she tilted her chin and smiled back as if they shared a secret. The CEO raised his glass to Daniel and to the next 20 years of excellence. Glasses lifted all around them. Evelyn's hand stayed at her side. Daniel stood smiling faintly as he accepted the microphone. Thank you, everyone, he began. I'm humbled by all your kind words. This year has been transformative. Evelyn heard the catch in his voice. She wondered if anyone else noticed how his gaze darted to Kara before returning to the crowd. It's been a privilege to work with the best team in the business, Daniel went on. And I'd like to extend special thanks to my colleague and dear friend Kara Morales. The ballroom erupted in more applause. Kara's smile widened and Daniel lifted his glass in her direction. Evelyn felt the burn of humiliation crawl up her neck, her face hot under the chandeliers. She saw a few people at nearby tables exchange glances. Some looked away, embarrassed on her behalf. She refused to blink back the tears. Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion. This year has taught me that you can't build anything worthwhile alone. That sometimes you find inspiration in places you never expected. Evelyn wanted to laugh. Inspiration. Was that what he called it? She studied his face, so familiar and yet now a stranger's. She had loved this man. She had defended him when he came home late, told herself he was exhausted, that the world demanded too much of him. She had believed him when he said Kara was just a rising star on the team. She wondered if he would ever understand the way he had diminished her. A soft chime sounded from the speakers as the CEO reclaimed the microphone. Before we return to the festivities, please join me in another round of applause for Daniel and for Kara for their extraordinary partnership. Evelyn's hands remained still at her sides as the room erupted once more. She felt like a ghost, trapped in the middle of her own life, unseen and irrelevant. Then a voice at her elbow startled her. Mrs. Walsh, are you all right? It was a junior associate. She couldn't recall his name. He looked genuinely concerned, his eyes flicking between her face and the couple still standing near the stage. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. He hesitated, then leaned closer, speaking so only she could hear. I'm sorry if this is out of line, but I thought you should know. A few of us saw them in Monterey last month. We thought it was odd. Just the two of them there all weekend. She met his gaze, stunned by his nervous honesty. Thank you, she whispered. Her heart pounded so hard she felt lightheaded. Somewhere behind her, the jazz band resumed playing. Laughter and clinking glasses swelled around her like a rising tide. She gripped the back of the chair to steady herself. It was no longer rumor, no longer a suspicion she could dismiss. Daniel and Kara hadn't just risked her dignity. They had obliterated it. And now, for the first time all evening, Evelyn felt something besides pain. She felt clarity. She would not let this night pass without consequence. Evelyn drifted away from the table, her legs unsteady, but her purpose sharpening like a blade. She slipped between clusters of colleagues and servers, balancing trays of cocktails. Her senses heightened. Every detail seemed to imprint itself on her memory. The scent of roses, the gleam of the marble floors, the crystal snowflakes dangling from the chandeliers. She wondered if Kara even felt guilty. If Daniel ever paused to consider that the life he'd been dismantling belonged to the woman who had stood beside him for 3 decades. Outside the ballroom's arched doorway was a smaller lounge, quieter and dimly lit. A few guests sat on tufted sofas, talking in low voices. Evelyn crossed to an unoccupied corner near the fireplace. She sank into an armchair and set her clutch on her lap. Her phone buzzed. A text from Renee lit up the screen. "Mom, is everything okay? You were quiet earlier. Just checking in." Evelyn's throat tightened. She typed back, "I need to talk. Are you free?" Seconds later, her daughter called. Renee's voice was bright with concern. "What's going on?" Evelyn took a breath, steadying her voice. I think your father has been having an affair." There was silence on the line, then a low, horrified exhale. "Oh, Mom. I found photos, texts." Evelyn's gaze dropped to her hands, lying motionless on her clutch. "He didn't even try to hide it." "Come home," Renee pleaded. "Please, you don't have to stay there and watch this." "I do." "Why?" "Because if I leave now, it will be like I'm the one ashamed, like I'm the one who doesn't belong." Renee went quiet, but Evelyn could feel her daughter's heartbreak stretching across the miles. "Then at least don't face them alone," Renee whispered. "I'm not alone," Evelyn said, though the words felt fragile. "I have you. You always have me." Evelyn closed her eyes, absorbing the strength in her daughter's voice. When she opened them again, she felt her resolve solidify. "I'm going to do something tonight, Renee." "What do you mean?" "I'm going to make sure everyone sees what he really is." Renee hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." "Then do what you need to do, and when you get home, I'll be waiting." Evelyn ended the call and drew a slow breath. Her heart still pounded, but her fear had receded, replaced by a clear, ringing certainty. She would not let this humiliation happen in shadows. She unlatched her clutch and scrolled through the photos again, each one a testament to Daniel's betrayal. With steady hands, she saved them all to a folder labeled simply the truth. Then she composed an email to herself, attaching every file just in case. She looked up to see Marjorie Taylor lingering near the doorway. Their eyes met. Marjorie hesitated, then crossed the lounge and sat beside her. "I saw you leave the ballroom," Marjorie said gently. "I was worried." Evelyn met her gaze. "I'm done being worried." Marjorie hesitated. "If there's anything I can do, there is." Marjorie straightened, her expression shifting from pity to resolve. "Tell me." "I need everyone to see this," Evelyn whispered. "Not tomorrow. Not through gossip. Tonight." Marjorie didn't look shocked. Instead, she nodded. "The AV technician is an intern." "He'd do anything," I asked. "Can you have these photos displayed on the projector?" Evelyn asked, her voice low and steady. After the dessert course, Marjorie took the phone, scrolled through the evidence, and exhaled slowly. "He deserves this," she murmured. "They both do." Evelyn swallowed the rush of emotion that surged in her chest. "Thank you." "Sit tight," Marjorie said, her eyes sparking with a fierce protectiveness Evelyn hadn't expected. "I'll take care of the arrangements." When she disappeared into the quarter, Evelyn sat back in her chair, letting the heat of the fireplace warm her chilled hands. For so long, she told herself it was better not to know that if she stayed quiet, she'd preserve the last scraps of their marriage. But now, with every second that passed, she felt lighter. She had spent half her life protecting Daniel's image, smoothing over his shortcomings, excusing his absences. Tonight, she would not protect him anymore. She closed her eyes and imagined the moment his face appeared on the screen, exposed to every colleague, every friend who had ever admired him. She pictured the shock, the whispered disbelief, the shame he would finally be forced to carry. And for the first time since she'd walked into that ballroom, she felt something almost like peace. Evelyn sat in the lounge, the low murmur of distant laughter threading through the silence. She felt as though she were floating above her own life, watching a version of herself she hardly recognized. A woman who had come here expecting to smile politely and play her role. A woman who had decided at last to stop pretending. When Marjorie returned, she looked calm. As though arranging to expose an affair at a holiday party were no more complicated than requesting another bottle of wine. The technician agreed, Marjorie said, sitting down beside her again. He thinks it's a photo slideshow for Daniel's retirement tribute. Thank you. Marjorie placed a hand over hers. You don't have to stand up there alone. Evelyn met her eyes, feeling a swell of gratitude. I don't intend to. Her mind worked quickly. She needed witnesses. People whose respect Daniel valued. People who wouldn't dismiss her as a scorned wife, grasping at melodrama. She rose and moved with quiet purpose through the corridor. One by one, she found them. Edward Gaines, the CFO who had known Daniel since the company's founding. Linda Perez, a partner with a reputation for unflinching honesty. Henry Chen, head of human resources, and Evelyn New, a man who despised hypocrisy. She asked each of them to join her in the lounge for a private matter. None refused. Some looked puzzled, others concerned, but they followed her without question. When all four of them sat facing her, Evelyn felt her palms dampen. She took a moment to gather her courage. I'm sorry to pull you away, she began, her voice low but clear. But I believe you deserve to know what you've been celebrating tonight. Linda frowned. Evelyn, what is this about? She opened her phone, her thumb hovering over the gallery. I think you already suspect, but you deserve the truth in full. She tapped the screen. One by one, the photos appeared. Daniel and Kara on the balcony in Monterey. Daniel's hand pressed to Kara's cheek, the text messages declaring their stolen hours and shared secrets. The hush fell over the room. Henry rubbed a hand over his mouth. Edward's brows knit in visible sorrow. Oh, Evelyn, Marjorie whispered. Linda was the first to speak. How long have you known? Long enough to have tried to convince myself I was mistaken, Evelyn replied. And too long to keep denying it. Edward looked pained. I can't say I'm surprised. There have been rumors. Evelyn nodded. I'm sure, but tonight it won't be rumor anymore. Henry met her gaze, his voice quiet. What do you want from us? Nothing you're unwilling to give, she said steadily. But I will stand in front of that room when these images appear. I will tell them that I know that I'm done being silent, and I will not let Daniel pretend this never happened. Marjorie's hand pressed more firmly over hers. I'll be by your side. I will too, Linda said without hesitation. Henry and Edward exchanged a look. Then Edward nodded. He owes you honesty, at the very least. Evelyn swallowed. Relief and dread knotted in her chest. But she forced herself to take another breath. I don't want to humiliate him out of spite, she said softly. But if he cared for my dignity, he would not have flaunted this in front of me. He's made his choices, Linda agreed. Evelyn tucked the phone away and looked each of them in the eye. When the dessert is served, the technician will start the slideshow. I'll step forward and speak. Henry's mouth tightened. We'll stand with you. It struck Evelyn how surreal this moment was, gathering her husband's oldest colleagues as allies in her own reckoning. But she felt no regret, only the faintest regret that she hadn't found the strength years earlier. Thank you, she said, her voice thick. Edward rested a hand on her shoulder. You don't deserve this, Evelyn. She lifted her chin. I don't. For a few moments, no one spoke. The fireplace crackled. Beyond the corridor, the music drifted in soft currents. Evelyn felt her pulse steady, her breathing even out. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was choosing. When they all stood, she walked back toward the ballroom at their side. The ballroom doors loomed ahead, golden lights spilling into the hallway. She realized she had never felt more certain of herself in her entire life. The ballroom was even louder when Evelyn returned, the jazz band gliding into a jubilant rendition of Let It Snow. Servers in crisp white jackets threaded between tables with silver trays of cream brulee and tiny glasses of port. Daniel sat at the head table, flushed with wine and the glow of his colleagues' admiration. Carol leaned close, whispering something that made him smile. Evelyn paused just inside the doorway. For one suspended instant, she let herself remember how she had once felt walking into rooms like this beside him. Proud, secure, convinced they were a team. That woman was gone now. She felt the warmth of Marjorie and Linda at her shoulder. A silent reassurance. Henry and Edward slipped into seats at a nearby table, their eyes fixed on Daniel as though studying a man they no longer quite recognized. The band quieted. A young assistant scurried to the podium and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice bright. "Please direct your attention to the screen for a slideshow celebrating Mr. Walsh's contributions this year." Evelyn could feel her pulse drumming in her throat. The lights dimmed. The first photo flickered onto the screen. It was Daniel standing beside a newly completed office tower, smiling for the press. A polite murmur of applause. The second image, a team dinner, Daniel at the center of the table, his arm casually draped over Kara's shoulders. The applause faltered. Then the third photo, Daniel and Kara on the balcony in Monterey, her face lifted to his, their lips almost touching. Gasps rippled through the darkness. A fourth image bloomed on the screen, a close-up of the text messages, Daniel's words glowing white on black. "I can't wait to hold you again. I love you." And then another. "Someday we won't have to hide anymore." The ballroom fell silent. A single stunned hush that seemed to press the air from Evelyn's lungs. Daniel's chair scraped the floor as he surged to his feet. His face was pale, eyes wide as he turned toward the projection. "Turn that off," he barked, voice cracking. "Turn it off right now." But the technician didn't move. The slideshow continued, each slide another undeniable piece of proof. Evelyn stepped forward into the center aisle. The guests turned to watch her, the circle of attention widening like a spotlight. Daniel saw her then. His mouth worked soundlessly before he finally managed. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" She lifted her chin, her voice steady, though her heart thundered. "What you never had the courage to do," she said. She turned to face the room. "My name is Evelyn Walsh. I have been Daniel's wife for 33 years. I have stood beside him, believed in him, built a life with him, and for at least the past year, he has been in a relationship with Miss Morales." Kara made a strangled sound, shrinking back in her chair. Evelyn's gaze swept the tables. "I will not pretend I am surprised anymore. I will not pretend this is acceptable. You all deserve to know the truth." A ripple of sympathetic murmurs rose. Someone at the back began clapping, one hesitant beat after another until it spread. Applause growing louder. Not for Daniel, but for the woman who refused to be humiliated in silence. Daniel stepped forward, his voice ragged. "Evelyn, please, we can talk about this." "There is nothing left to discuss," she said, cutting him off. Her hands were remarkably steady as she lifted her clutch and turned to face Kara. "I hope you understand that no amount of secrecy could make this less pathetic." Kara's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, unable to respond. Evelyn took a step back, scanning the stunned faces around her. The CEO had risen halfway out of his chair, his mouth agape. Edward looked stricken. Linda lifted her chin in quiet solidarity. She felt no shame, no regret, only a fierce, liberating certainty. "I will be leaving tonight," Evelyn announced, her voice clear and resonant. "I will not be returning to the home I built with this man, and I will not be answering any of his calls." Daniel reached for her arm. "Evelyn." She stepped away, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You have already chosen her. Now you can live with it." And then she walked past him, past Kara's stricken face, past the shocked hush that had descended over the celebration. The band still hadn't resumed playing in the quiet. Her heels clicked steadily across the marble floor. Outside the ballroom, the corridor was empty. The music and clatter sealed behind her like a tomb. She paused only once, turning back to look through the glass doors. Daniel still stood frozen near the screen, dwarfed by the images of his own betrayal. Evelyn drew in a long, steadying breath. Then she walked away without looking back. Evelyn didn't remember much of the elevator ride down to the lobby, only the hollow quiet and the way her reflection in the brass doors seemed older and somehow lighter all at once. When she stepped out into the cool night air, the December wind lifted her hair from her shoulders. She pulled her wrap tight around herself and walked to the curb, her breath clouding in front of her. A valet hurried to meet her. "Would you like your car, ma'am?" She hesitated. Her car was waiting. So was the house she'd shared with Daniel for over 3 decades. The house that felt more like a museum of false memories than a home. "No," she heard herself say. "I'll call a ride." He nodded and stepped away. Evelyn pulled out her phone. A dozen notifications glowed across the screen. Missed calls from Daniel, text messages that began with her name and ended with frantic, desperate pleas. She didn't open a single one. Instead, she called Renee. Her daughter's voice came soft but urgent, as if she'd been holding her breath. "It's done," Evelyn whispered. Renee exhaled shakily. "Where are you?" "Outside the hotel. I'll book you a room. Or wait, come here. Just come to my house." "I don't want to ruin your holiday," Evelyn said automatically, even as the words tasted bitter in her mouth. "Mom," Renee's voice broke. "You have never ruined anything. Please just come home to me." Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the tears that had held back all night, slip free at last. "All right," she whispered. 30 minutes later, she sat in the back seat of a rideshare, her clutch on her lap, watching the glittering skyline recede behind her. She thought about Daniel, how he would be pacing the ballroom, trying to salvage his reputation, trying to explain away the evidence she had laid bare. She thought about Kara, her carefully curated persona shattered in front of everyone she'd ever wanted to impress. But mostly, Evelyn thought about the woman she had been so patient, so willing to believe the best in a man, who had given her so little in return. That woman was gone. Now, when the car pulled to a stop in front of Renee's modest craftsman house, Evelyn climbed out slowly, feeling the unfamiliar weight of freedom in every step. The porch light was on. Renee stood waiting at the door, her husband, Matt, just behind her. Evelyn walked up the steps, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Renee wrapped her arms around her without a word, holding her tight. And for a moment, Evelyn let herself sink into the embrace like a child. "I'm sorry," she whispered against her daughter's shoulder. "Don't you dare be sorry," Renee said fiercely. "Not for finally standing up for yourself." They stood like that for a long time. Later, when Evelyn had washed the mascara from her cheeks and changed into borrowed pajamas, she sat on the edge of Renee's guest bed, staring at the phone on the nightstand. More messages had come. "Evelyn, please, we can fix this. I was confused. I didn't mean to hurt you. Come home. We can talk." Evelyn reached for the phone. Her finger hovered over the reply box. Then she set it down, turned it face down on the table, and drew in a long breath. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. She didn't owe him her silence, her understanding, or her forgiveness. All she owed herself was peace. In the quiet, she pulled the blankets up around her and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged to herself again. And as sleep pulled her under, Evelyn knew that whatever came next, divorce, a new address, the hard work of reclaiming her own life, she would meet it on her terms. No more pretending, no more shame, only the truth shining brighter than any chandelier, any illusion, any carefully constructed lie. And in that truth, she finally felt free. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care and see you in the next video.